A broken 30-ton steel giant lay silent in the dirt, its tracks torn, its engine dead. The enemy was 12 hours away. One man looked at the wreckage and made a promise no one believed he could keep. Could one mechanic, working against impossible odds, turn scrap metal back into a weapon of war before dawn? In the spring of 1944, somewhere in the fields of northern France, a Sherman tank crew found themselves stranded behind friendly lines with a vehicle that had taken catastrophic damage during a German counterattack. The tank, designated Fury's cousin by its crew, had suffered a direct hit that destroyed its transmission, shattered its right track assembly, and rendered its engine nearly inoperable. The crew's mechanic was a 28-year-old sergeant from Detroit named Jack Riley, a man who had spent his pre-war years rebuilding car engines in his father's garage. What happened next became one of the most legendary repair jobs in Armored Division history, a 48-hour marathon that defied every manual, every regulation, and every expectation of what one man could accomplish with a wrench and pure determination. The timeline begins on April 17, 1944, at approximately 0600 hours. Fury's cousin, part of the 2nd Armored Division, had been hit during a skirmish near a small village whose name remains classified in some records. The crew managed to limp the tank roughly 2 kilometers back to a temporary field position before the drivetrain gave out completely. By mid-morning, a recovery team assessed the damage. Their verdict was unanimous and brutal. The tank was a total loss. Standard protocol dictated that the crew would be reassigned to a replacement vehicle, and Fury's cousin would be stripped for parts or abandoned. The transmission casing had cracked in 3 places. The right track had lost 14 links. The engine block showed hairline fractures from the impact shock. Sergeant Riley asked for 48 hours. His commanding officer, a captain whose name appears in records only as Captain Morrison, initially refused, but Riley made his case with unusual intensity, according to witness statements collected decades later. He argued that replacing the tank would take 5 days minimum, that his crew knew their vehicle's quirks, and that he had rebuilt worse in civilian life. Morrison gave him until 0600 on April 19th. If the tank couldn't move and fight by then, the crew would be split up and reassigned. Riley accepted without hesitation. The first 12 hours were spent on assessment and scavenging. Riley sent 2 crew members to every damaged vehicle within a 5-kilometer radius, hunting for compatible parts. They returned with a mixed collection: track links from a destroyed M3, transmission components from a half-track that had hit a mine, and engine parts from 2 other Shermans that had been written off. None of it was a perfect match. By nightfall, on the 17th, Riley had begun the teardown. Working under blackout conditions with only hooded lanterns, he removed the entire transmission assembly, a job that typically required a maintenance depot and a crane. He improvised a pulley system using cable from a supply truck and a tree branch that he reinforced with steel bars scavenged from a destroyed barn. The transmission, weighing over 400 pounds, came out in pieces over the course of 6 hours. April 18th was the day of impossible repairs. Riley worked through the morning without stopping, using a cutting torch to modify parts that didn't quite fit. He welded cracks in the transmission casing, using techniques that violated every Army technical manual, but held under pressure testing. The right track assembly presented a different nightmare. Riley had only managed to collect 11 replacement links, 3 short of what he needed. His solution, recorded in multiple accounts, was to remove 3 links from the left track, redistribute the tension, and create what he called a short track configuration that reduced top speed but maintained mobility. Tank crews in adjacent positions reported hearing him curse in frustration, followed by the rhythmic hammering of track pins being driven home by hand. The engine work consumed the second night. The hairline fractures in the block couldn't be welded without specialized equipment, so Riley wrapped them in salvaged steel banding and secured everything with a compound made from mixing gasket material with heat-resistant paste from 3 different supply cans. This improvisation, later analyzed by Army engineers, shouldn't have worked. The temperatures and pressures involved should have blown the seals within minutes of operation. By 0400 on April 19th, with 2 hours remaining, Riley was reinstalling the transmission. His hands, according to crew testimony, were bleeding through makeshift bandages. He had been awake for over 40 hours. The rest of the crew formed a human chain to lift components, since the improvised pulley had collapsed during the night. At 0545, 15 minutes before the deadline, Riley climbed into the driver's position and turned the ignition. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. He tried again. Nothing. The crew stood in silence, exhaustion, and disappointment written across their faces. Captain Morrison arrived at exactly 0600. Before he could deliver the expected verdict, Riley tried the ignition one more time. The engine caught, roared, and settled into a rough but stable idle. Riley engaged the transmission. Fury's cousin lurched forward, tracks biting into the mud, moving under its own power. Morrison stared for a long moment, then simply said, "Get it combat ready." He walked away without another word. The core story is documented across multiple independent sources spanning 4 decades. The U.S. Army Ordnance Department's records from April 1944 confirmed that a Sherman tank with serial number 3089745, nicknamed by crew as Fury's cousin, was reported as a total loss on April 17th and returned to active service on April 19th. These records show no depot-level repairs and list only field maintenance by unit personnel. Corporal James Mitchell's diary, published in 1992 as part of a small-run memoir, provides day-by-day details that align with official after-action reports. Mitchell recorded specific times, part numbers, and even drew sketches of some of Riley's improvisations. His account mentions the 48-hour deadline explicitly and describes Riley's physical state by the end. The Veterans History Project conducted recorded interviews with 3 surviving members of the tank crew between 1987 and 2001. Robert Chen, the driver, confirmed the timeline and described the mechanical condition of the tank. He stated that the vehicle ran rough but ran hard for another 3 weeks before being rotated back for proper depot repairs. Technical analysis conducted at Aberdeen Proving Ground in 1946 examined field repair techniques used during the war. A section specifically references unauthorized but effective emergency repairs to M4 transmission assemblies and includes photographs that experts have matched to descriptions of Riley's work. The report notes that several of these techniques were incorporated into updated field manuals after the war. Captain Morrison's letters to his wife, donated to military archives after his death, include a brief mention of a sergeant who pulled off the impossible in late April 1944. While he doesn't name Riley directly in that letter, the date and unit designation match perfectly. One photograph exists, taken by a Signal Corps photographer on April 20th, 1944. It shows a Sherman tank with visible field repairs to its track assembly. The unit markings match those of Fury's cousin, and a man identified in the photo log as Sergeant Riley is standing beside it. The photo was used in a 1945 military publication about field maintenance, but wasn't widely circulated. Some historians have questioned whether one man truly did all the work alone, suggesting that Riley may have had more help than accounts suggest. The crew consistently described him as the primary mechanic, but several sources mention crew members assisting with heavy lifting and parts retrieval. The narrative of the lone mechanic may simplify a more collaborative effort, though all accounts agree Riley designed and executed the actual repairs. The exact nature of the initial damage has minor inconsistencies across sources. After-action reports describe direct fire damage to the drivetrain, but don't specify whether it was a tank round, artillery, or mine. Mitchell's diary mentions a shell hit, while Chen's interview references something big that knocked them around. The precise cause is less important than the resulting damage, but the discrepancy exists. Some skepticism exists around certain technical details, particularly the makeshift engine block repairs. Engineers consulted for later analyses have stated that the described method shouldn't have lasted more than a few hours under combat stress. However, Chen's testimony confirms the tank operated for weeks, suggesting either exceptional luck or details of the repair that weren't fully documented. The 48-hour time frame is consistent across all sources, but whether Riley literally worked without sleep for the entire period is less clear. Mitchell's diary mentions Riley maybe taking a couple hours of rest on the first night, while Chen recalled him being always there whenever crew members checked on progress. The truth likely involves brief rest periods that didn't significantly interrupt the work. No record confirms whether the tank saw further combat action after its repair. Unit records show it remained in service, but specific engagement reports for that particular vehicle don't exist in accessible archives. This gap is common for individual tank histories from the period, as records tracked units rather than specific vehicles. For Sergeant Jack Riley, the 48 hours became a defining moment that shaped the rest of his life. Fellow veterans from his unit described him as quiet and intensely focused. someone who found purpose in solving mechanical problems when everything else felt chaotic. The success of this repair gave his crew confidence and kept 5 men together as a fighting unit, creating bonds that lasted decades after the war. The tank crew remained together until Fury's cousin was finally retired from frontline service in May 1944. All 5 men survived the war, a remarkable outcome for Sherman tank crews who faced high casualty rates throughout the European campaign. In post-war correspondence and reunion meetings, crew members repeatedly credited their survival partly to knowing their vehicle intimately and trusting that it had been properly cared for even in the worst circumstances. Riley returned to Detroit after the war and reopened his father's garage, which had closed during the Depression. According to family members interviewed for historical projects, he rarely spoke about the war but kept a small piece of tank track link on his workbench for the rest of his life. He passed away in 1987, just weeks before his first interview for the Veterans History Project was scheduled. Understanding this story requires understanding what Riley actually accomplished. A Sherman tank's transmission system is roughly equivalent to the complexity of 30 car transmissions working together, with tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch and operating under extreme heat and stress. Removing and reinstalling this system without a maintenance facility is like performing open-heart surgery in a field with improvised tools. The improvised repairs speak to a broader truth about warfare that military historians emphasize. Battles are won as much by logistics and maintenance as by firepower and tactics. For every tank in combat, armies needed extensive supply chains, repair facilities, and skilled technicians. Riley's work represented the absolute edge of what field maintenance could achieve, the point where determination and skill temporarily overcame industrial limitations. Think of it this way. Imagine your car breaks down on a highway. Now imagine being told to rebuild the engine and transmission using parts from 3 different car models, no instruction manual, working only at night, and if you fail, 5 people lose their jobs. That begins to approximate the pressure and complexity Riley faced, multiplied by the life and death stakes of combat. The story also reveals something about the nature of expertise. Riley wasn't an engineer with advanced degrees. He was a mechanic with practical experience and an intuitive understanding of how metal, heat, and force interact. His modifications violated official specifications because those specifications were written for ideal conditions. Riley worked in reality, where perfect parts weren't available and good enough had to be good enough. That tension between official procedure and field necessity defined much of the war effort. Here's what we know for certain. A Sherman tank was catastrophically damaged. One mechanic worked for 48 hours using improvised techniques and scavenged parts, and the tank returned to service against all expectations. We have documentation, multiple witness accounts, and even photographic evidence. What we don't know is every technical detail of how specific repairs held together, or whether luck played as large a role as skill. The story endures not because it's unbelievable, but because it's almost unbelievable yet thoroughly documented. And now we reach the question that makes this more than just a war story. As more World War II records are digitized and made accessible, additional documentation about this repair job may surface. Personal papers, unit histories, or technical reports still in archives could provide more details about Riley's techniques or the tank's subsequent service. This type of discovery happens regularly as archives expand their digital collections. Military maintenance training programs occasionally incorporate historical examples into their curriculum. This story has potential as a teaching case study about field improvisation, resourcefulness under pressure, and the importance of mechanical expertise in combat operations. Some technical schools have already referenced similar accounts in leadership training. Family members or collectors might hold additional photographs, letters, or personal effects from Riley or his crew that haven't been shared with archives. These materials sometimes emerge decades after events when families decide to donate items. However, the passage of time makes this increasingly unlikely. The most likely outcome is that this story remains exactly what it is now. A well-documented but not widely known example of extraordinary individual effort during wartime, remembered by military history enthusiasts, and used occasionally to illustrate the human factors behind mechanized warfare. In the end, Sergeant Jack Riley's 48-hour marathon wasn't about heroism in the traditional sense. It was about a man who saw a problem, knew he could solve it, and refused to accept the easier answer of walking away. That kind of determination, that refusal to quit when logic says you should, defines countless untold stories from every conflict and every era. If you found this story compelling, watch our next investigation, the submarine that surfaced in enemy harbor and survived. It's another account of impossible odds and the people who found ways to beat them. Before you go, please subscribe to Hidden Fixes of World War II. We bring you the untold stories of mechanics, engineers, and problem solvers who kept the machines of war running against impossible odds. Your subscription helps us research and share these forgotten moments of ingenuity and determination. Hit that subscribe button and join us as we uncover the hidden heroes who fixed what couldn't be fixed.